there are luxury yachts. And then there are ships so enormous, so complex, and so ambitious that the word yacht almost seems too small to describe them. They can stretch longer than a football field. Behind their polished hulls are swimming pools, private cinemas, wellness centers, enormous living spaces, and engineering systems designed to keep an entire floating world operating far from land. For most people, owning something like this is almost impossible to imagine. But for the world's wealthiest individuals, there is another question. Who can actually build one? Because when a billionaire wants something that has never existed before, money alone is not enough. Someone still has to turn that idea into steel. And for generations, one name has repeatedly appeared behind some of the largest and most extraordinary private yachts ever constructed. Lurssen. Today, this German shipbuilder operates on a scale far removed from the traditional image of a luxury boatyard. But the remarkable thing about Lurssen is not simply the size of the yachts it builds. It is how far the company had to travel to reach this point. Because this story did not begin with billionaires. It began with a 24-year-old boat builder in a small workshop near Bremen. In 1875, Friedrich Lürssen completed his training as a boat builder and wanted to work at the boatyard run by his father, Luther. His father gave him unexpected advice. Start your own. One boatyard, he believed, could not provide enough income to support two families. So on June 27, 1875, Friedrich opened his own workshop in Ammend near Bremen. There was no global luxury brand, no enormous shipyard, no fleet of superyachts, only a young craftsman building boats. Friedrich initially concentrated on racing rowboats. They were relatively simple machines, but racing exposes weaknesses quickly. A boat that is too heavy loses speed. Poor construction becomes obvious under pressure. Tiny differences in shape and workmanship can determine who wins. Friedrich's boats developed a reputation for being lightweight, precise, and fast. And then, in 1886, came an opportunity that would change the direction of the company. Gottlieb Daimler was experimenting with his new internal combustion engine and needed a boat in which to test it on water. He turned to Friedrich Lürssen. The result was a 6-meter vessel called REMS. Its engine produced only around 1.5 horsepower. By modern standards, almost nothing. But the power was not what mattered. The idea was, according to Lürsen's history, REMS became the world's first motorboat. For a company that would eventually become famous for some of the world's most technically sophisticated yachts, the symbolism is difficult to miss. Lürsen's connection with marine engineering was there almost from the beginning. A boat did not simply have to look beautiful. It had to perform. As the company expanded, Friedrich's son Otto brought formal shipbuilding engineering into the family business. Craftsmanship was increasingly combined with technical knowledge. And speed became one of the clearest demonstrations of what that combination could achieve. Lurssen boats began winning races and setting records. In 1911, a Lurssen Daimler speedboat became a sensation in European competition, winning the unofficial world championship known as the Champion of the Sea. By 1925, 50 years after Friedrich opened his workshop, Lurssen had completed its 10,000th vessel. But the company was about to face challenges that engineering alone could not solve. Otto Lurssen died unexpectedly in 1932 at just 52. Leadership passed to his wife, Frida. At a time when women rarely held positions of power in heavy industry, she took responsibility for the shipyard and helped preserve the family business through one of the most turbulent periods in European history. Then came war. When the Second World War ended, Lurssen had to rebuild. But one thing survived. Knowledge. Boat building knowledge passed from Friedrich to Otto, from Otto and Frida to their sons, and eventually to another generation. That continuity would become one of Lursen's greatest advantages. The company remains family-owned today. And as the post-war world recovered, Lurssen began building larger yachts again. Then, in 1971, came an important turning point. Corinthia Vi. At 67.9 meters, she was designed by John Bannenberg and looked dramatically different from many traditional yachts of the period. Long, clean lines gave her a modern profile. Lurssen itself describes Corinthia V as a precursor to the yachts it builds today. This represented something larger than a change in styling. For almost a century, Lurssen had developed its reputation through performance and engineering. Now, those capabilities were being combined with a new idea. A yacht could become architecture, a private environment built around one owner. Not simply transportation, not simply recreation, but a floating expression of identity. And that idea would eventually transform Lurssen. By the 1980s, much of the company's production capacity was occupied by naval work. Lurssen could have remained there. Instead, in 1988, it established a dedicated yacht building division and committed significant production capacity to large private yachts. The timing was extraordinary. As global wealth expanded, so did the ambitions of the world's richest yacht owners. 50 meters was no longer necessarily enough. Owners wanted 80, then 100, then more. They wanted greater range, more privacy, larger interiors, and increasingly complicated technology. And at these dimensions, building a yacht becomes a completely different engineering problem. Weight, stability, noise, vibration, electrical power, climate control, water treatment, navigation, safety, propulsion, crew circulation, guest privacy. Everything has to work together. And almost all of it must disappear behind an interior that feels effortless. This was the world Lurssen had spent generations preparing for. Then came Azzam. Delivered in 2013, Azzam measures 180.65 meters from bow to stern. At the time, she became the longest yacht in the world. But size was only part of the challenge. The brief also demanded speed. Azzam was designed to exceed 30 knots while operating in warm and relatively shallow waters. At this scale, that is an extraordinary engineering requirement. Every additional meter means more structure, more systems, more weight, more resistance. Yet, the finished yacht could achieve speeds associated with vessels dramatically smaller than herself. And Lurssen completed her in less than 3 years, from keel laying to delivery. Azzam demonstrates something important about the superyacht business. A vessel like this is not simply a luxury product made larger. It is a private engineering project on an enormous scale. And 3 years later, Lurssen demonstrated that length was not the only way to measure ambition. In 2016 came Dilbar. At 156 meters, she is shorter than Azzam. But her gross tonnage reaches 15,917, and Lurssen describes her as the world's largest motor yacht by gross tonnage. Inside is a swimming pool stretching 25 meters and holding approximately 180 cubic meters of water. That sounds like pure extravagance. But from an engineering perspective, a swimming pool of that size is also a problem. Water moves. And when a large body of water moves inside another structure already moving through the sea, stability and structural behavior have to be carefully understood. This is the hidden side of a superyacht. The marble is visible. The engineering is not. And that brings us back to the question at the beginning. Why are Lurssen yachts so expensive? The easiest answer would be size. But that is only the beginning. Lurssen does not mass-produce these yachts. There is no assembly line producing thousands of identical Azzams. There is no standard Dilbar waiting in a showroom. These are bespoke projects. A yacht begins with an owner's requirements. Designers and engineers then have to determine how those ideas can actually exist on water. And the more unusual the request becomes, the more complicated the engineering becomes. Before steel is cut, designs can be modeled and analyzed digitally. Structural loads must be calculated, hydrodynamics studied, machinery planned, noise and vibration controlled. Then construction begins. Steel and aluminum structures have to be fabricated, engines installed, electrical networks integrated, pipes and cables routed through the vessel, interiors built around machinery that must still remain accessible for maintenance, safety systems tested. And when the yacht finally looks finished, it still has to prove itself at sea. Lurssen says it employs around 600 experienced naval engineers and maintains its own research and development capabilities. That expertise is part of what the customer is paying for. Not simply expensive materials, not simply a famous name, but the ability to make an extraordinarily complicated machine feel like a private home. And expectations continue to rise. Consider Kismet, delivered in 2024. At 122 meters, she is considerably shorter than Azzam. But inside is a wellness suite with a hammam, sauna, and cryotherapy chamber, a gym and yoga studio, a cinema with a 150-inch screen, and even an underwater seating area. Behind the luxury is another generation of technology. Kismet uses a hybrid powertrain with a full electric mode. Waste heat from its generators can be recovered to heat pool water. Dynamic positioning allows the yacht to maintain its position electronically in certain conditions without relying entirely on a conventional anchor. The luxury becomes more sophisticated, and so does the machine underneath it. This helps explain why Lurssen occupies such an unusual position. The company says that 13 of the 20 largest yachts built during the past 20 years came from Lurssen. That kind of record creates something money cannot instantly reproduce: experience. If a customer wants a conventional luxury yacht, there are many shipyards capable of building one. But as the project becomes larger, faster, quieter, more complicated, and more unprecedented, the number of companies capable of delivering it begins to shrink. That is the business Lurssen has spent generations building. And perhaps that is why its story is ultimately less about billionaires than it first appears. Because the billionaires arrived relatively late. The engineering came first. Long before Azzam. Long before Dilbar. Long before private cinemas, enormous swimming pools, and underwater lounges, there was Friedrich Lürssen, a 24-year-old boat builder, a small workshop near Bremen, and eventually a 6-meter experimental boat built for Gottlieb Daimler. The distance between that little motorboat in 1886 and a 180-meter superyacht traveling at more than 30 knots seems almost impossible. But the name behind both stories is the same. Lurssen. More than a century of engineering transformed a family boatyard into one of the world's most remarkable yacht builders. And perhaps that is the real reason a Lurssen costs so much. You are not simply buying a yacht. You are asking a company with generations of accumulated knowledge to build something that may never have existed before and make it work. Because at the very top of the luxury world, exclusivity is not simply about owning something expensive. It is about owning something almost nobody else on Earth could have built.